going to talk to Ronnie about, largely about this exhibition, I hope. And I saw it a few weeks ago, and I thought it was an absolutely beautiful show, following on his last beautiful show here. I think that he's, sorry Ronnie, talking about you as he, but it struck me that Ronnie had achieved a kind of a plateau, which can be a bad or a good thing, of excellence in his work, and he's managed to stay up on that plateau of excellence, which is, I think, a considerable achievement.
Thank you.
And long may it continue. Could I ask you first of all about the title of the show, In Geminate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the title of the show, and I guess by extension the titles of individual works, are things that, you know, that come after the work's been made.
Right. Yeah.
Always. So it's
I wondered, yeah.
Yeah, everyone works differently, but I certainly have no idea about what I'm doing when I'm working, or why I'm doing it, or what's going to happen. And even in a sense, you know, if you have a date for a show, in particular a solo show in particular, you just have this, you know, I mean, I just go into the studio every day and work, and, you know, whatever happens, happens in a sense. But you get a vague sense of things coming together. But I guess in general, to answer your question, that idea of reiterating something, and it feels like that's what I do in my work, and have done certainly for the last 25 years or so. I've been working longer than, you know, a lot longer than that, I think, with being a student and everything. But I have this feeling, I've always felt with my own work that I'm trying to push it in new directions every time I work and every time I go into the studio. Never wanting to sort of make the same work twice, really. And so I always kind of work and try and push it in different directions, but I can't ever escape the feeling that no matter how wide apart the works get, I'm always doing and saying the same thing, and it's a kind of almost like the sort of like the id, the idea of something within you that wants to express itself, and no matter how you try and go somewhere else or run somewhere else, it's very insistent.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's really where that title comes from.
Oh yeah. I think what they say, writers always write the same book over and over, you know. And I think painters paint the same painting effectively over and over. It's always them. It's always.
Yeah. But I mean, you put yourself in new situations and you try, like a big thing from my own working methods is always, you know, and I guess I say this in the knowledge that it sort of disproves itself the more that you work, but you're always trying to go into fresh territory. But the more that you do that, you realise that there's, you know, there are these habitual tics or ways that you do things. And I am interested anyhow in sort of systems, and I think all the work has in common, all of the works, it's me trying to set up something which is on the verge of collapse all the time, and that's I guess the central sort of tenet in the work, really, I suppose. But you try, to, you know, to properly be creative, and I do think I've always, you know, certain artists can work and they're quite recognisable stylistically, and they can, some people can like plough a very narrow furrow.
Yes.
And that's just something that's hasn't, not that there's anything wrong with that, but for me it's just not something that I like to do. But I'm conscious as I say that the older I get, the more work I make, then my work isn't recognisable, and people kind of point at it and say that's.
Yes, there's something about it that is Ronnie Hughes. Yeah. Keith Jarrett, the musician, said something interesting that I read recently. It was because he became identified with his, from the 1970s, with the Coleman concert that he did at Dublin, and he said that it's all very well, but sometimes you've got to be able to forget in order to make something new. And
well, that particular album, that particular concert, like the Coleman concert, I love that album, and I love it for the fact that it was a out of tune broken piano,
Yeah.
and he had to, you know, because he really had to apply himself to it then in a way, you know, really improvise in a way that created this magic. And I think for me, I mean, I would listen to that album quite a bit when I work, but
Right.
genuinely
Yeah.
I would actually.
Yeah.
And I just find for me like setting up sequences or patterns and then thwarting them, you know, or trying to really put yourself in a place where you have to really work with intuition, with instinct,
Yes.
and you know, which isn't surrendering, I guess, intentionality or any in some way. It's you know, it's.
Because it's a very active process. I mean, you're applying marks, you're doing things.
Well, I think you know, the 98% of your brain that works in the background is much more intelligent than the 2% that you have to stop and think about what I'm doing. So a lot of times, I mean, you're trying to get into a kind of flow state or work state when you're working, and it's the bits where you have to stop and kind of look and, you know, think about what's going on. They're the more difficult bits, but you have to do that too.
You have to do that. In fact, downstairs you were saying before that sometimes that can be quite a negative experience when you come back to something and look at it again.
Yeah. I mean, it can be like that. Like, it's funny. I live in sort of west coast of Ireland, like between Sligo and Ballina. You know, very rarely visitors to studios. It's a very sort of private place. But it just so happened I had people at the weekend there that came to the studio. Well, they weren't coming to the studio. They were coming to see my wife, and they were just being polite, and they said they come into the studio. But you know, and they weren't particularly interested in art. And in those situations, when you go into a space with people who aren't particularly interested in art, the work, anything you have there looks awful.
Suddenly,
yeah, because you see things and you go, you kind of put yourself in the position of what is this, you know. So that was a bit dispiriting actually when they left on Sunday, because I went and I knew they were coming. I was like, in case they come into the studio, and this happens a lot, in case they come in, you know, of course this show had been taken out and you know, but anyway, I pulled some things out and put them up on the wall, you know, thinking, oh, that looks okay. Completely evaporated, of course, once they got there. But that can happen with the work a lot anyhow, and I have work, you know, I have a painting rack, you know, full of paintings, you know, that might stretch back, you know, I guess, well, some of them back to the early 90s actually, but yeah, most of them a bit closer than that. But the work all sits there, and I can see it all sitting there, and it's very rare that you get a chance to bring new work, sort of back. You know, whenever it wants to see old work, it's just, it's just kind of awful in a way. But they sit there, and you think, well, fine, they're okay. But when I see them sitting in the rack a lot of the time, I kind of look at them, and I'm a bit of a sort of devil for painting overall paintings, because
yes, you were saying that,
after a while, you just seem like it's just stuff sitting, it's just stuff, and I'm like, you know, I'm gonna put it out and work. But occasionally you pull things out and put it on the wall. I'm gonna do something, you know, with this, because it saves you making a new stretching stuff, you know, and there's something to fight with already on it. But sometimes, you can put it on the wall and you go, I think it's quite good, you know, and so you put it back in again. And then there are other times, maybe like about 6 years ago, where I'm in the garden with a bonfire of all the work in the studio.
Really?
Well, that's just the one time that happened. When there were pretty sort of extreme events that caused that. But anyway, thankfully I didn't set fire to it all at that point. But I was, I had this sort of moment where I almost did. But, so your work, it's really hard to evaluate. You know, I just like to make the work that sustains me in making and looking at, you know, and the hope is that there are some other people. You know,
Yes.
probably aren't many, but there are some out there who
Yeah.
can find something in it too.
Is there a difference for you between drawing and painting? I mean, drawing meaning, I suppose, work on paper, and then work on canvas and board.
Well, I think, and well, my work probably for about the last 20 years anyhow has been very drawing focused. Like I think of it as drawing, even when I'm working with paint. And a lot of times, if I'm working on paper, you know, well, I use coloured pencils and things as well, but I work with gouache a lot, so it sort of is painting too. But drawing, I like that kind of sense of drawing in the sense, you know, in the way of drawing something out of yourself, or you know, or yeah, just pulling something out of nowhere, and I find that if I'm making drawings, I'm doing that, and if I'm making paintings, I'm doing that, and yeah, the same, like the idea of the line that's in drawing follows me about in the paintings anyway, because I'm always making sort of hard edges between things.
Yes, but your work doesn't function in the way that, say, like Bridget Riley will do, I think gouaches on paper,
Yeah.
and then they will be literally transposed on the canvas on a much bigger scale. You don't seem to have that kind of relationship from the study to the finished thing. They're more of an equal weight.
Yeah. I mean, I've tried that, but it just doesn't seem to work out for me to do that. I mean, I might make some drawings and then they give me an idea for a way of making paintings. But if I try and transcribe something, you know, typically if you're trying to transcribe something, it's because it has some sort of quality, you know, that's happened in its making. But that's usually to do with its scale and with its medium. And once you know, if you try and do something that's, you know, from this size up to something this size, it just transforms it in a way that it always just feels like a pale sort of copy of it in some way. So it just
So your paintings kind of emerge in the process of doing them.
Very much so. Yeah.
I noticed that in some of these works, there's a lot of very subtle layering. Yeah. Is that a new development, or is that?
No, I think that's been going for in the work certainly since about 2008. I mean, you know, I just work on that and I rework and overwork. Do you like that effect of things half visible under? I hesitate to say yes sometimes. I'm careful with it. Like sometimes things happen in a natural, kind of real way, and then other times you kind of try and make that happen, and then sometimes I get suspicious of that. So I like things if they feel like they've happened in a real sense. I mean, I remember when I was a student, we came down to Temple Bars, must have been 1986 or something like that, and we came in with David Crone, and we were looking around the artists in the studios at the time, and we went into one guy's studio, I can't remember who he is, genuinely, and yeah, like a lot of the Temple Bars at the time I know and would know their work, but this particular artist we went into, and people asked him how he worked, and he said, well, you know, I throw all this stuff onto the painting, you know, he throws all sorts of sand and plaster and this and that, and gets a really nice surface going, and then he puts the image on. And I could see David Crone standing in the corner, like this here, like, you know, looking, like, you know, like this was a total travesty. And, you know, when you're a student, you know, you don't really have any bearings for that type of thing. So afterwards, when we went back up to Belfast, I asked him about it, and he just like, he was explaining, like, from his point of view, you know, like it really horrified him that someone would tell someone to paint in that way. So I have a little bit of that, you know, instilled in me in some way. But generally, I don't really follow kind of rules or think about those types of things. you kind of do, when you're making a painting, once, you're kind of just desperate to make it work, you know, any which way you can, a lot of the time. And you're just trying to get out of the process.
Yeah.
In some perspective.
Is it kind of like being in an argument or in
no, I wouldn't say an argument, I would definitely say a conversation. It's like a conversation with someone that you really have to pay attention to. So you'll do things and then you'll just look and you'll just, you know, in a funny way, listen to what
and respond.
And then off you go again. But sometimes, I mean, it's not very straightforward with me at all. A lot of times, any exhibition I would have, there may be paintings in there that I've made in a few months, but there will equally be paintings that take 20 years to happen, and you don't know when it's going to kick in. You know, like the painting I'm looking at over here, it was,
oh yes,
most of it was there in 2009, but it just sat and I couldn't get it to work, and there was a little painting downstairs, which I had ready to show in a show that I did in the Model in 2017, and when I got it there, I kind of shrank from it and brought it back to the studio, and it sat. So you get, when you bring them out of the studio, you can see sometimes, not always, but typically you can kind of, once you bring them somewhere else, you realise that they work or they don't. And they go back to the studio, and then they might just sit there and relax for a long time before you know what to do with them.
And looking at this show and the previous one, I thought of chemical isotopes, where you're basically in a way, if you look at that, each one is the same elements, but yet the slightest change in the number of electrons in an isotope, or in your case, I don't know what something produces quite a visually different effect completely, even though you think it's basically the same sort of thinking and the same thing going on, but yet it produces different results.
Well, I think you can just take like very simple elements, and just as they develop over time, things can become very complicated. Like I have a sort of very amateur approach to reading about science, or like things like chaos theory and those types of ideas, or things in cosmology. It's not that I'm interested in science, I'm interested in the ideas and the way that why things are the way that they are.
Yes. It struck me that I agreed with you years ago. You were saying you don't like this confrontation between abstraction and representation, because it's not, it's sort of misleading because I think that we live in an abstract world, so you're beginning with abstraction anyway. You're not.
But I think I mean, my objection to that idea of things being abstract and figurative, and obviously most people like to have something that they recognise.
They love to have something to hang on to.
But there's nothing you can paint that can't be recognised. It's just a lot of people like to just perceive that there's a certain function for what art is, or what it should look like, or what it should do. But anything that you make, that I make particularly, I'm aware that when you look at it, it functions on a whole range of levels all at once, and in different ways for different people.
Yes.
And that's not something to run from. That's actually something for me to kind of embrace. And it's not just working with particular types of. I mean, a lot of geometric type forms in the work happen. But it's not just to do with geometry. It's not just to do with shape. It's also to do with colour and relationships of colour, or setting up sort of atmospheres and moods. Like in ways that music does much more successfully, where it can just very directly work. I think painting can do that, but it can also, you know, hit other sort of little markers. Sometimes, I mean, I don't know, sometimes I see things, you know, I'm aware that I see that when I look at anything, I always see all the types of things that might be all at once. And you don't, you know, sometimes you know where things come from, sometimes it's just randomly, you know, like the type of this painting over here. Because there was a kids show when I was small called Camberwick Green, and I think that reminded me of that. You know, there's a sort of music box at the start which moves. So I used to be fascinated by these triangles that opened out, where they were slightly off triangles. And you know, I wouldn't even have thought, you know, but when I make this painting and you're looking at it and then sort of the penny drops, that's
probably
what it reminds you of. So,
You said that lately colour has become more important to you, or you're more aware of it?
Yeah, well, I would have, when I was younger, I would have worked in much more sort of neutral tones a lot of the time.
Definitely.
And yeah, I think maybe it was a, you know, a kind of chromophobia in a way, in a certain way. It felt a bit, it used to feel to me a little bit cheap, colour, you know, in a funny way. There's that saying about, who was it that says it? Was it Ruskin that said that, oh, nature paints like a harlot, you know, which is, very Victorian, very 19th century on in all sorts of respects, as a statement, very misogynistic statement, probably, but that idea of colour as something to be distrusted, I think, maybe it's just to do as well with where I lived, and you know, when I used to make that type of work, you know, coming from where I lived in Belfast, or even where I lived in Dublin, when I was making work like that, it was just what I saw around me. And I just, by 2006 I went away on a residency to Albert's Foundation, and when I was there I kind of freed up a lot in terms of working with imagery, working with colour, and it just felt much more comfortable. And I think ultimately, it was about the time I started to feel that I'm really just making my own work.
Yes, you made a lot of very interesting work there, I thought, And were you aware of the context, not in the natural context in the woodland area, but that Joseph and Annie Albert's context, is that?
Well, when I got there, I was much more aware of Joseph Albert's work, and then when I got there, of course, they have this amazing sort of warehouse full of both their work, and actually Annie Albert's work to me was much more engaging. Like I really find it astonishing, her work. And I just straight away, without really knowing why, you know, I mean, obviously Joseph Albert's, it's very formal, it works in a very particular way, but I just, what Annie Albert's does is more in that sense of, has a sort of built-in entropy,
Absolutely,
which I respond to, and it's something I've always been interested in, so it just worked rather than the sort of dry formalism of his work. But amazing artists, you know, too, obviously. And I teach, those who don't know, I teach up in Sligo, and so Joseph Albert's is great for, you know, in terms of sort of colour theory, and you know, showing people how colour works. And it was from doing, I think really, like I wrote a course maybe about 12 years ago, where all these vague ideas had to sort of concretise a little bit. And when I did that, I brought it into the studio with me a lot more consciously about playing with the colour.
I can imagine that.
Then something like this, you know, doesn't really work with colour at all. It just, it has red, but it just functions as a tonal painting.
Did you move to Sligo because you were going to teach in the model, or teach in college?
Yeah, well, I got a part-time job teaching, and I think at the time I lived in Dublin. I loved living in Dublin, and it seemed like you had to be here to be an artist, you know. But I just thought, well, I'll give it a go. You know, give it a go for 6 months, and you know, like 30 years later, yeah, I'm still there. Mind you, it was tough. I found it really difficult to move there, and in all sorts of ways. But yeah, it's been a great place for me. I think, just not just for painting, but for my life overall.
Oh yeah. I think it's interesting that somehow abstraction seems like a more urban kind of art than representation. Yeah, if you look at, like, there's yourself in Sligo, John Wallace Smith is in rural Wexford, and Charlie Tyrrell is in halfway up Clifton Alleys all those years. It's kind of and there's no contradiction or tension between making this kind of work and being where they are, where you are.
Well, I think the thing about the world nowadays, like, you can be in the west coast of Ireland, but you can have your nose parked in things all over the world, and it feels a bit like that to me, like being. I mean, I know that if they switched off the internet and television, I couldn't live beside it. I couldn't, I mean, like, I live beside the sea. It's beautiful. I swim in the sea, and the landscape's gorgeous, I think. But I couldn't do it. I just know I couldn't. And then the thing, like, my partner, her parents lived in New York with her, so we'd go over twice a year to New York, so you got to see a lot of work and everything. So I always felt, and I am urban, like I grew up in Belfast. I might qualify as urban to a lot of people in Dublin, but so I've that's sort of more natural to me in a certain respect. And so I think the work probably has that in that music. I'm not doing the kind. The danger with going to Sligo is that you make a very particular type of work. That's what I was afraid of when I went there first. And I think I probably did in a certain respect with the paintings.
I remember talking to Nick Miller once when he moved to Sligo. He said, the one thing I'm going to do is make sure I steer clear of Ben Bulbin. But the first painting, well, I didn't make, when I moved to Sligo, I didn't make abstract painting. Still don't, but I didn't make them. But I decided that I was trying to jettison all the work that I had been making, which is a bit more political and sort of issue based in a way. And I spent a year and a half trying to, which is a long time, to try and make something that didn't have anything in it. And the very first painting I made, a large diptych, which Emma bought, Brenda, if you can remember the time. I think it's in the National Concert Hall, that particular painting. But when I look at that painting now, it's just not array. I just see all the, it's just everything about it is Sligo landscape, even though to me it was completely abstract. But it's incredible when I look at it. It's so pictorial in a certain way. I might find out about these works at some point. I don't know. Maybe. Do you enjoy teaching?
I do most of the time. It's hard. It is genuinely hard. In all sorts of ways. And I find it very draining. And I find it, if I've some days when we teach a couple of hours, I'm fine. But if I have like a 6-hour day or something, and then I come home, 6 hours is nothing compared to, like, my dad was a chef and he'd work, the entire day. But and I've done that, but I'd come home and you might think I'm going to the studio this evening, and you can't. Like brain is just wiped out.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably because of teaching, trying to work with people and listen to people in a different way, like listen to your own painting, but you've all these other different voices. But it's been good for me. It's kept me open to. You have to be open-minded. You have to look at other types of work. It's made me go and see things. So I've always kept looking at art and other types of artwork all the time.
Yes.
Certainly not just painting. And I think that's fed into my work in some way.
Right, it's very important. Yeah.
Although I've had people, I remember for a while, when I was making work not too dissimilar to this, but I remember the odd time artists would come to my studio, and like Ethna Jordan, I remember one time came in and she was looking at the work, and Alice Meyer said something similar when she was young, and she said, "You're really like an outsider artist, aren't you?" And I had to sort of think about that, and just, that can sound a little bit derogatory, but when I thought about it, I thought, well, I actually am, because I'm not in a conversation, in a general conversation. Yeah. I just feel like I'm, in the way that certain outsider artists, they're just blinkered and they're just doing their thing, and I feel that that's what I do in a certain respect, even though I'm still I'm fairly informed about what other people do and what's going on, elsewhere.
Well, as you say, you're teaching, I imagine you have to have your antennae out to see what is this person getting at, or what are they trying to do.
Well, based on experience, I would say you should do, but not everyone does.
There are teachers who turn out copies of themselves and their students, which is a bad thing.
Yeah, or just stopped somewhere in the 80s or something, or the 90s. It's good to just sort of stay awake and stay sort of aware of what else is happening. Even if you're not in that conversation, it's just something that interests you.
Yeah.
No, and not just art, just like the arts in general, looking at other types of things. It's always useful.
Do you tend to work on one painting at a time, or would you have several?
It's something I always say to students: only work on one thing at a time, but working about 12 at once. So if that doesn't make any sense. Like in my studio, I'll have a particular space where I tend to work most of the time. I could work around the space, but at one place in particular that I want to work. So whatever I'm doing, I'll put it there, and I'll have other work up, but not close to it, so I can't, and so I can just focus, and I'll just focus on that, and do what I can, and when I can't then I'll move it somewhere else in the studio and put something else there, and then take a few minutes to adjust, and then try.
How long might that be that you would focus on one piece? Does that vary considerably?
It does. Sometimes it's just very practical things. Like, if you're, say, the painting that's the big painting downstairs, it might just be, getting all those lines. It's sort of quite tedious work of putting up, sort of masking off all these lines or measuring things up. There's sort of tasks sometimes, that you do, and when you're doing tasks, you have music on, and you're not really thinking that sort of profoundly. It's a good thing. There's no intuition involved. You're just it's sort of grunt work in a way. And then there's where you're sort of totally into it, and you can't have any noise, and you switch things off and concentrate on work. And sometimes that might be 10 minutes, and sometimes it might be 7 hours. You don't know. You really don't know.
Yeah.
Everything hopefully is different from one work to the next.
Yeah. Would you have a structured day when you're devoting a day to painting?
Yeah, just, well, the main thing is just getting yourself in there for so long. That's the big thing. I mean, I believe it was Thomas Laskowski, I remember him telling me, like, it's, it's showing up. That's the main thing you have to be as a painter. And the other thing is that, that idea, like 2% inspiration and 98% perspiration, and that's, there's a lot of truth in that. So it's just, get myself into the studio. My studio is, most of the year, it's different now, most of the year it's very cold. Studio's maybe a bit bigger than this room, and it's as high as this room, if not higher, so it's cold, it's north facing windows and everything. So the biggest resistance I have is that I have to dress up almost like a spaceman, I really have to go to a lot of trouble. Otherwise it's just, it's very cold.
What heat have you got?
Well, I have radiators there, but if I put them on, all the heat just goes up above, and it raises the temperature maybe about 4 degrees in the studio. So I put the heat on to dry paintings, but not to warm them up. That's what I do. In fact, I put the paintings onto the radiator. If I'm doing something, then I'll put the heat on, so the radiator comes up the heat, and I'll put the painting on top of it, and then do something else, and then pull that painting over again and work on it. But I typically I'll just go in. I'll just try and be in the morning by, 10 at the latest, and I'll work till lunchtime, and then I'll walk over to the house, have lunch, and we'll come back over again and work. If I'm really busy, if I have a show, if you have a sort of big show, it's like a sort of, if it's a really big show and you're under pressure, which I hate pressure, I don't like.
Right, yeah.
And I like just to work regularly and just have lots of work and be ready to do exhibitions. But to make things for shows, I really hate that. It just feels like hubris, and it's you're tempting fate in some way to thwart what you're doing. But occasionally you do find yourself against the wire a little bit, and I'll work in the evening, but but it's rare that I would work. I prefer not to work in the evening. I just don't feel like that all the time. So I just work a day. I work kind of almost like a 9 to 6 type. Most days. And then I go, because it's just across my house. I can pop over and look, or I can pop over and stretch something or prime something or do things. I can spend an hour or something like that and go back. Switch the TV on again.
I remember William de Kooning, this thing about describing a day, and I was where he'd go and have lunch. He has this anxiety gnawing at him all the time. I got to get back to the studio to fix that painting. And his word all the time is, I got to fix that painting. So he's fix. Something comes into his mind when he's away from it, that saying, back.
Well, that's the thing about making any type of artwork, but paintings definitely. In your studio, everything's broken, all the time. Just and even sometimes there are paintings that are finished, but you don't recognise them as such. But it's just a set of problems that you've made, and you're going around. That's like spinning plates, making a show to me. It's enjoyable and it's sustaining. It's not enjoyable, it's not like playing the guitar or something, but it's absorbing, and you feel good after doing it. Not necessarily when you're doing it a lot of the time.
Do you get feeling when you made something that you're really happy with? Do you think, that's good?
Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes. I do. Well, you do. When you feel that you've painted yourself out of it, you know, which can take a long time.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah, you can kind of have a brief moment, but I don't know if it's being northern or whatever. But I you know, I always feel that that's asking for trouble. You know, to feel good or to pat yourself in the back.
Yeah.
You know? So I just, yeah.
You just hope that it's okay.
Yeah, I don't say anything about it. It's just, yeah, we make a quiet agreement not to say anything in the painting, and we'll just go on through our lives. I think that's the way it works.
When you look back on older work, do you have some that you favour more than others?
I do, yeah. I think, but you find out when you're asked to do a talk about your work, that's when it's very easy to, you know, make those decisions. You realise.
You realise how you feel.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the same actually. In another way, when I used to document my work, now not anymore because everything's digital nowadays, but it used to be, you know, if you made a painting, like when I was relatively young, if you made a painting back then, you had to have black and white photos of it, you had to have colour photos, you had to colour slides, you had to have medium formats, and then when you took photographs, you had to bracket them. So, you know, so if you wanted to apply, you know, when you were young, and I was kind of like, you know, ambitious and wanted to do, you know, show yourself to the world, you always had like 6 sets of slides of your work. You know, that was my thing. I had to have 6 sets. But to have that 6 sets, you know, you would have to, like, when you would bracket when you took things. So it was a real palaver and very expensive. So when I went to photograph work, that was when I did my best painting, because when I look through the lens and I go, I realise it's going, you know, once I do this.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'd find myself lots of times rushing to the palette and, you know, doing things, and then going, oh, that's okay, now I'm taking the shot. But yeah, so I'm not sure we got there.
Yeah. In terms of, you used to use oil paint, but because of the chemical issues with the oil paint, you gradually moved to acrylic.
Yeah, I was getting all sorts of problems with solvent, and the way I used to work, I used to pour bucketfuls of turpentine and things, and I was getting chest infections, and then I started getting problems. I started getting all sorts of dermatitis and all sorts of things, and I was always covered in paint, and still am. Like when I go, you know. And I know some painters that were very tidy, and these looked like they were made by a tidy person, but I just have to stand near a palette, you know, with good clothes on, and then it would just jump at me. So I make a lot of mess. So I'm sorry, I lost my track now of the question you asked.
So, there's a lot of subtlety in many of these paintings, but do you find the acrylic is actually very flexible?
Well, when I stopped using oil paint and started working with acrylic, which I tried to use when I was at college and couldn't successfully. Like I just something about oil paint that I just kind of liked. But because I had worked at that stage, you know, for about 10 years with oil paint, and I kind of knew what I was interested in and the surface qualities. When I started working again, and I used a particular type of acrylic paint where I was making my own paints, and I was doing that for years. It's become much harder to do now, and my supplies are almost dwindling to nothing now. But so I have to buy, you know, other types of like golden paint or Liquitex, and then I can still buy mediums and stuff that I can kind of do things to make it behave the way that I want to. But yeah, no, it's very different. The main difference between acrylic for me and oil paint is when you mixed up oil paint, it didn't budge. It just, you know, the exact tone, the exact hue stayed there. Yeah. Whereas acrylic paint, if what you paint on isn't what's there when it dries. It it darkens down.
Do you get used to that? You must get used to it.
Yeah, well, you find coping strategies for it. I will say that much. And it just means sometimes, rather than touching a particular area, you just do it again.
Oh, yeah.
That's the way I tend to do it.
Yeah.
But then some artists don't. The idea of mixing up an exact colour twice. And like I've been surprised on occasion by artists. Like I've said to students, just mix that red up again.
Oh, yeah.
And I won't say the artist, but very well known, very good artist, was, you can't just mix up the same red again. I was, of course you can. And they were like, you know, and they were, that's just the idea. It was completely anathema to them, but you could be specific, which, yeah, I tend to be, or try to be, as much as possible.
Yeah.
But that other artist works much more kind of expressive than mine.
I think that was all the questions that I have for you. Is there any other observation about the show in particular? How did you find making the work? Was that it?
Well, I mean, I knew there was a show coming sort of in around 2 years' time after the last show that was up here. But because I just work all the time anyhow, so like last year I felt very confident I had a show. This time last year I was like, I have the show ready, I can relax it, I don't have to worry about that type of thing. And then in December, around about December, I had all this work made, and not this work, but I had a bunch of work made, some of these paintings, but I had a real crisis of confidence about the work and about what I was doing. And those things come out of left field, you never know when that's going to come, but it always, comes. It might be 10 years between one showing and another, but that happens. But so around about December, I was, God, what am I doing? I don't, and all the things that I'd like to think about, like I started going, this just looks like Ronnie Hughes work, and that really was, that sort of threw me a little bit. So we took a month off from painting over that period, and decided not to think about it at all, but then you just get this kind of itch to go back in. And then I went back into the studio, and largely felt what was the problem there. But once I started working, a few of the paintings that I had, I more or less very heavily kind of revised them. Like to say the two paintings at the back there, the two on the outside, were remade after that. They were both more originally like the painting in the middle.
Okay, yeah.
Thereabouts. Not exactly like that, but kind of more a bit like that. So it just became, but because they all looked like they were all together, and then it started feeling a bit mechanistic. So that was my problem, and I had different work sort of function that way. But just got back at them again. And I made them both like that, and then I changed that one to kind of whiter one. But it's just you're trying things out. I like it when I work. A lot of the time, it's creative play, and you're just trying things out. Sometimes you can throw a year or 2 years of work away, very easily, which nobody really likes doing, but you go, sometimes it just has to happen. But you can kind of find something else. So in general, and then the show sort of looms very quickly, and then you get asked to write a statement about the show, and then you're like, oh gosh, what was I thinking about here? So then I write a statement, which is a revision of all the other statements I've made for 10 or 15 years, which again is where agenda comes from. Yeah, because you're always, for me anyway, it's the same thing, but yeah, you've moved on a little bit and something else has happened. Yeah, but you don't have, I'm not trying to proselytize or tell anyone anything. I don't know if anyone's any questions in the audience.
Yeah, I feel they alluded to music a couple of times, mentioned the concert. To me, it feels like there's a lot of rhythm and harmony in what you do. Do you listen while you're creating a lot, and do you ever find that what you're listening to affects how you work? Do you think there's any synesthetic sort of correlation?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely there is.
Okay.
Now, as sometimes you'll be so involved in something that it's too much. The music, you can't deal with it.
Yeah.
And then largely anyway, like I listen to a lot of music. Like you might, there's certain types of music you wouldn't be listening to. You wouldn't be listening to hard rock or something in the studio, which you might some other context maybe, but so you might listen to a lot of instrumental music, typically rather than so like maybe listen to a lot of jazz music. But then certain things like I don't know if it's too raucous, like with John Coltrane playing and it's fast and frenzied.
This actually pass a bit of
it
culture.
stresses me out. I could see that, but just certain things interfere.
Yeah.
But a lot of time, if I'm drawing and if I'm making works on paper, I like music and I find it very directly makes me do things. But it's slightly slower with the painting, so you could be listening to all so during the course of something's making, it all evens out. But it's there, and those types of musical things, like thinking about rhythm or one thing I definitely try and do is create a sort of percussive rhythm and work a lot of the time.
That definitely comes across to me.
Good. Or so you're trying to, like in different ways, create moments across the surface and space, or with colour, and knowing the way that people might look at in sort of Gestalt theory, the way that you will organise how you think about things. So you might create groupings, or by scale, or by shape, or by colour. And I tend to try and create sort of pulse points, or make people follow certain types of directions, things like that. I mean, I don't know if that ever works, or I don't, but it seems to me to it works for me. So I kind of think, well, surely it'll work somehow for somebody else.
I think it does.
If they're receptive enough, I guess.
Yeah.
There's definitely an element of Gestalt clearly enamel behind, that continuation of the line.
Yeah.
You can follow it through.
Actually, that's a good point. I never thought of that with this. Yeah, so there are things in this. There are certain, you can see circles and things like that, but there are also letters, a couple of images.
Typography or whatever.
Yeah, but then that I
Suppress
or hide or block in some way. Just so that, like, I'm interested in any of the work that I make, and I'm aware that most people, when it comes, if they look at your paintings, they don't spend that long looking at them typically. But I like the idea that the work can end up somewhere where someone might look at it over a long time, and I think that's where art works. It's made over a long time, and I think I like the idea that it'll sort of unfold over time, and you'll start to make relationships between things. I mean, it's not going to happen in the typical 20 seconds that someone might look at a painting, but if they're spending
you give time.
20 minutes or several days, or which can happen, those things will start to kind of come out.
I'm trying to figure out these squares on this one. how steady they are they level? It's the triangular is throwing them off.
Yeah,
You mentioned precarious
yeah,
early at the beginning or
Yeah.
chaos.
yeah,
So I get that feeling from that.
yeah,
There's an unsteadiness.
yeah. Well, a lot of the time I'll build a kind of geometry into things
Yeah.
and then knock it off in some way and make it a little bit awry or wonky.
Yeah.
Like the thing about, I was talking about Joseph Albert earlier, I mean, it's, who am I to say this word, but I find them a bit dull at times
Yeah.
with those particular paintings compared to Andy Albert's, and it's just for me, because they're so mechanical in the way in
Yeah.
terms of how they work. Not in others, not in terms, but anyhow.
Yeah. Reductive. Yeah. Quite reductive.
Yeah, but I find if you make things so that someone, and it's, someone starts to form, and then, a bit like a dream when you wake up, you can sort of half remember it. I like that with paintings, that they'll click into place and then they'll disappear again. I like that with a lot of artwork, like other people's artwork. I'm not just paintings, not in literature and music and things like that as well. I see that. Or I see that. Think about it.
Do they all take a very long time, Ronnie, or is there I'm just wondering whether you have an anxiety about arriving at something that looks good relatively quickly. The way sometimes is there that thing of I'm not done with it yet, or I can't be at this point yet, or some look a lot more worked, and that they take a lot longer than others. I just wondered.
Very, very occasionally I've made something quickly, within like a month or something. It might be drawings quickly, obviously, but paintings are, but it just doesn't work for me. I mean, a lot of times, like I say to students are always trying to get out of their work. They're trying to do it as quickly as possible, and for me it's not about getting out of it, it's about getting into it, and just really getting involved. But then you work and it starts, so you get sort of pushed out of it after a while, and it just starts to behave by itself if you're lucky, and then you finish. If that answers what you're saying.
No, it was more just I suppose the anxiety. Sometimes when things resolve quicker or something.
Yeah.
Is that a problem? Or?
I don't get anxious about making paintings nowadays. Really, I don't mean that in a sort of casual and casually confident type of way. I just mean it's just I just feel it's just like going into work and doing things, and I'm just if it works, great. If it doesn't work, I'll just keep hammering away at it until it works, or else I take it off the stretcher and put it in the rack for a while.
Sorry, Ryan, can I ask you?
Yeah.
When we were making prints here, just on that question as well, did you feel under a lot more pressure because there was a sort of an allotted time zone that we had to kind of work on there? Did you feel that it was a kind of a Damocles sword over your head, kind of that we had about like a week or something to make?
Yeah, well, the funny thing, because plates were sent up to my studio, and I was making those carborundum prints, and I hadn't made any prints at that point for about 10 years, and I hadn't made any carborundums before, so I was just trying to figure out what they did. So I made 3 kind of test things where I was playing, and then I went up and you printed them all, and then that was the end of it. And I was like, that was the beginning. And I was like, wait, I know what to do now.
That's true.
And I never get asked back. So it's funny. So those prints appear now and again at shows, and then it's like they were up and in it a few, about 5 or 6 years ago. and I feel slightly like, oh, like,
Yeah.
because once you sort of grasp what's possible, I was like, I wanted to make, you know, I wanted to make things that were, you know, more impressive in a certain way, or I don't know, more ambitious in some way. Like they were quite small, and I liked the prints, but at the same time, I felt like, you know, particularly if you have someone like yourself who's a master printmaker who can kind of make them for you and take all the effort out of it. It would be nice.
I could, looking at it now from what you were saying, I can imagine that you were like, what? Is that it? Fuck. You know, we need another month you know, to work away, but yeah. They turned out nice.
Yeah. Thank you.
So will we?
Yeah, well, yeah.
That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.